The inheritance game. Oh, come on, Max, Sophia said with a smirk, tapping the envelope in my hand. You've always been more of a charity case than family. Laughter rippled through the elegant conference room as I stared at the envelope. Sarah Reed, $5,000 settlement. My inheritance was a pittance compared to others. Benjamin sipped his bourbon. Satisfied. Sophia beamed, expecting my quiet humiliation. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. My name is Sarah Reed, and at 33, I just endured the most humiliating moment of my life. They thought they could break me. Benjamin, my calculating father-in-law. And Sophia, my ambitious sister-in-law. They thought I would sit there embarrassed, swallowing their insults, clutching that ridiculous envelope that offered me scraps while they divided millions. But while they smirk, basking in their petty triumph, thinking they've reduced me to nothing, I'm not crying because what they don't know is I saw this coming, and I've already set the wheels in motion. By the time this reading of the will is over, it won't be me walking away in disgrace. I let the crisp paper cut into my palm, the weight of the moment pressing against my skin. The numbers on the check burned themselves into my mind, a deliberate insult disguised as generosity. $5,000. Not a meaningful share of Thomas Reed's fortune. Not recognition as his son's widow. Just a token, a dismissal. The sound of clinking ice in crystal tumblers and hushed whispers filled the air around me. Every pair of eyes in the walnut-paneled conference room flicked between me and that envelope, some wide with pity, others with poorly concealed amusement. Nobody was stopping this. Nobody was defending me. My gaze flickered to James, Thomas's lawyer and supposed friend to everyone in the room. He was reviewing another document, seemingly indifferent to the spectacle unraveling just feet away. My humiliation wasn't just tolerated. It was orchestrated. I should have expected this. No, I did expect this. From the moment I married into the Reed family, Benjamin made it clear that I didn't belong. He tolerated me because Thomas insisted. But I was never truly accepted. A schoolteacher from a middle-class background wasn't worthy of the Reed fortune. And Sophia. She despised me simply because I existed, because I had taken her precious brother's attention away from her. Because I didn't fawn over her achievements, her connections, her perfectly curated San Francisco life. I had swallowed years of cold glances, backhanded compliments, whispered insults at family gatherings. I had endured being the outsider in my own marriage, the subject of Benjamin's scrutiny and Sophia's cruelty. But this was their masterpiece. The final act of degradation. And they expected me to sit there humiliated. Benjamin lifted his crystal tumbler, swirling the amber liquid inside, watching me over the rim with amusement. Oh, don't take it so personally, dear. Thomas loved you in his way. This is just business. I smiled because they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that for the past 8 months I had been preparing for this. That while Benjamin was busy lording over his tech empire and Sophia was reveling in her role as the spoiled princess, I was quietly collecting every shred of evidence I needed to dismantle their world. They didn't know that I had already met with a forensic accountant and uncovered every shady transaction Benjamin had funneled through Thomas's accounts. They didn't know that I had proof of Sophia's corporate espionage, the one she thought she had hidden so well. They didn't know that after today, they wouldn't have the luxury of looking down on me anymore. They thought they were watching me fall. They were watching me rise. The weight of the envelope in my hand suddenly felt insignificant. I lifted my gaze, meeting Sophia's with an eerie calm that made her smirk falter. I tucked the envelope into my purse. Sophia blinked. Wait, what are you? I reached for a water glass from the center of the conference table, bringing it to my lips with deliberate ease. Then I turned to Benjamin. You know, I said, my voice smooth and even, you're right. Maybe I should accept my place. I tilted my glass toward him in a silent toast and took a slow sip. Benjamin's lips parted slightly, as if suddenly unsure of the game. He thought he was winning. Sophia shifted beside her father, eyes darting between me and him. Sarah, if you're trying to. I set my glass down, my smile never wavering. Oh, don't worry, Sophia. The best part of all this is yet to come. And I was just getting started. I swirled the water in my glass, watching the liquid shimmer under the recessed lighting. Sophia was still staring at me, waiting for some kind of reaction, a crack in my composure, a tremor in my voice, anything that would confirm she had one. But I wasn't giving her that. Not now, not ever. Because while she thought this little stunt was her crowning moment, I had already set the stage for my own finale. I'd seen this coming the moment Thomas died. I knew this reading of the will wasn't just about inheritance. It was about power. About Benjamin cementing his control, about Sophia proving once again that she was the golden child, the princess who deserved everything. And I knew exactly where that left me, on the outside. I had no illusions about my place in this family. From the moment I married Thomas, Benjamin made it clear I was tolerated, not accepted. At first I tried. God, I tried. I played the dutiful daughter-in-law, brushed off the passive-aggressive comments, let Benjamin and Sophia walk all over me because I thought if I just held on long enough, they'd change. They didn't. So I did. I stopped playing their game. Stopped begging for approval I was never going to get. And I started paying attention because people like Benjamin and Sophia, they always overplayed their hand. 8 months ago, I started preparing. It began with the finances. Benjamin had always treated Thomas like an extension of his wealth. His son's money was his money. His success was his to flaunt. But he'd gotten careless. Thomas and I had a joint account. One we both contributed to. And for months I noticed odd withdrawals, hundreds of thousands of dollars disappearing into accounts I didn't recognize. When I brought it up to Thomas, he brushed it off. Dad just needs a little extra for some new investments, he had said, rubbing the back of his neck. It's temporary. It was never temporary. So while Thomas wasn't paying attention, I started moving my own money out, opened a separate account, quietly rerouted my direct deposits, made sure that if this marriage collapsed, I wouldn't be left with nothing. Then I dug deeper. Benjamin wasn't just using Thomas's money. He was stealing it. I hired a forensic accountant, and what he found was worse than I expected. Benjamin had taken out loans under Thomas's name. He was siphoning funds, covering his tracks just enough that Thomas never noticed. But I did. And I kept every receipt. Then there was Sophia. I'd always known she was a liar. She had a way of twisting reality, spinning situations so she was always the victim, always the one deserving sympathy. But her role at Reed Technologies, that was different. Because Sophia wasn't just lying. She was selling company secrets. I found out by accident a few months ago. Thomas had left his laptop open while he showered. An email notification appeared, and I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from work. Instead, I saw an email from a competitor, confirming receipt of the package, and promising the final wire transfer. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I found the bank records in Thomas's email trash folder. She hadn't even bothered to hide it well. The next day, I started digging, checked her emails, her cloud accounts, her Venmo history. And I found it all, correspondences with 3 different competing firms, file transfers, offshore account numbers. I screenshotted everything, and I waited. The final piece, Thomas's sudden death. Heart attack at 37. Unexpected. Devastating. But what the family didn't know was that Thomas and I had been fighting that night. About his father. About the money. About his sister. He'd finally started to see it, the manipulation, the lies. He'd promised to fix it, to confront them. He never got the chance. But I kept his promise for him. So I sat across from James a week before the official reading, slid a neatly organized file across the table, and watched as his expression shifted from polite sympathy to cold fury. I thought you should know who you're really working for, I had said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. James flipped through the pages, Benjamin's transactions, the loan documents, the transfers. When he reached the file on Sophia, his fingers tightened around the paper. She's been selling proprietary technology, he murmured, his voice deadly calm. For years. For years, I confirmed. James exhaled slowly, then met my gaze. What do you want from me, Sarah? I smiled. Just make sure everyone important is here today, I said simply. Including the board members. He nodded once, and I knew right then and there the Reed empire was already beginning to crumble. So now, as I sat in this sterile conference room with a $5,000 check in my purse, surrounded by people who thought they were witnessing my downfall, I felt nothing but satisfaction. Because they had no idea what was about to hit them. Benjamin was still sipping his bourbon, oblivious. Sophia had gone back to gloating, her confidence returning now that I hadn't reacted the way she wanted. They had no idea that in just a few minutes, the entire board of Reed Technologies would receive a neatly organized dossier, filled with proof of Benjamin's embezzlement and Sophia's betrayal. The Reed family's financial skeletons would be laid bare right in the middle of the will reading. Benjamin's crimes would come to light with James making sure the right people found out. I had spent years letting them walk over me. But today was the beginning of their reckoning. I reached for my water glass, raising it slightly. To family, I murmured, just loud enough for Sophia to hear. She smirked, thinking I meant it. I smirked back, knowing I didn't. Sophia was still smirking, swirling the cognac in her glass like a queen holding court. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he tapped against the mahogany table, utterly pleased with himself. And I just sat there watching, waiting, letting them believe for just a little longer that they had won. Sophia sighed dramatically, tilting her head. You know, Sarah, I really don't get why you look so tense. She gestured around the lavish conference room, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the San Francisco skyline, the original artwork adorning the walls. You should be grateful. I mean, look at where you are. Her tone was syrupy sweet, but I knew what she really meant. Look at where I let you be. Like she had granted me some great favor by allowing me to attend her brother's will reading at all. Benjamin gave a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Oh, Sophia, don't tease her. She's probably just overwhelmed. He said, waving a lazy hand at the opulence around us. After all, this isn't exactly familiar to her, is it? My fingers curled under the table, nails pressing into my palm. That was always the game with them. The digs were never outright, never loud enough for others to catch, just sharp little knives slipping between the ribs, one after another. Though, Sophia continued, I will say I was surprised you showed up at all. After the way things ended with Thomas, I figured you'd be. She paused, searching for the word, too ashamed. The grin that tugged at her lips sent something hot and sharp slicing through me. Ashamed. I knew exactly what she was implying. Benjamin hummed, taking another sip of bourbon. Well, Thomas was certainly under a lot of stress before he died. Marriage troubles, I hear. You know how these things can be tough on the heart. The words were deliberately placed, carefully weighted. They weren't just planting seeds of doubt. They wanted everyone in the room to think I had somehow caused Thomas's heart attack. I let out a soft, amused breath. You're right, I said, leaning forward slightly. Thomas was under a lot of stress. But that's what happens when you discover your family has been stealing from you for years. Benjamin's glass paused mid-air. I smiled. That must be exhausting though. Constantly covering for other people's crimes, having to step in and fix things before they collapse, always cleaning up other people's messes. I tilted my head just enough to let the implications sink in. Benjamin's lips pressed into a thin line. Sophia, still unaware of the shift in tone, let out a mock gasp. Whoa. Defensive much, are we? I let my smile widen, slow and deliberate. Not at all. I just find it funny how people project their own guilt onto others, almost as if, I lifted my gaze, meeting hers, they're the ones who have something to hide. For a second, just a second, Sophia's smirk faltered, but then she scoffed, flipping her long dark hair over her shoulder. Oh please, Sarah, you really think I'd waste my time hiding anything from you? No. I thought you just assumed I'd never be smart enough to look. Benjamin sighed, feigning exhaustion. All right, enough of this back and forth. We're here to settle Thomas's estate, not, he waved a dismissive hand, whatever this is. I watched him carefully, noting the slight edge to his voice. Benjamin never intervened unless he felt like control was slipping. Interesting. Sophia huffed. Fine. But Sarah, I have to admit I am kind of curious. She propped her chin in her palm. How do you do it? I arched a brow. Do what? Accept that Thomas was planning to leave you. She mused, her voice full of mock sincerity. I mean, don't get me wrong, he cared about you. But as a husband? God, he was so done with the marriage. Sophia, Benjamin cut in sharply, the warning clear. I said nothing. Just lifted my glass and took a slow sip. Because now I understood, this wasn't about me. This had never been about me. Sophia's hatred for me wasn't just some petty jealousy or sibling rivalry. It was more than that. She hated that Thomas chose me, that I had something she never could, his love, his commitment. And maybe deep down, a part of her had always assumed she could break us apart, that she could get inside my head, make me question him, make me doubt the foundation we had built. That if she chipped away long enough, I'd finally crack. And today, at this reading, in front of all these people, this was supposed to be her masterpiece. I was supposed to crumble. I didn't. I smiled, setting my glass down with a quiet clink. You're right, Sophia, I said lightly. Thomas was unhappy. But you know what the difference is between you and me. She arched a brow. Oh, do tell. I leaned forward, my voice steady, controlled. I don't need to steal or betray people to feel like I'm winning. The amusement in her eyes flickered, and I added, my tone soft but lethal, and I sure as hell don't need to sell out my own family just to prove I matter. Sophia's expression twisted, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Excuse me. I tilted my head. Something wrong. For the first time all day, she looked rattled. Benjamin, sensing the shift, placed a hand on Sophia's arm. Enough, he said, his voice low. Let's not turn this into a... But Sophia wasn't listening. Her eyes were locked onto mine, a slow realization creeping into her features, because in that moment she understood, I knew something. I just smiled, because I wasn't the one on the verge of losing control. She was. Sophia's smirk was gone. Her fingers clenched around the stem of her cognac glass, knuckles whitening. She knew. She didn't know what exactly, not yet, but she felt it, the shift in power, the way the ground beneath her carefully crafted world had just begun to crack. And she was right to be scared. Because today everything she built was going to burn. The first crack came as a whisper, a soft murmur sweeping across the conference room like an invisible ripple. I didn't even have to turn around to know what was happening. James had entered, followed by the board members, just as planned. Benjamin noticed them first, his eyes widening slightly before he composed himself, smoothing down his tailored suit jacket. Ah, James. I believe we're in the middle of the reading. Yes, James replied, his voice calm but firm. And there's been a development. Sophia's eyes narrowed, darting between her father and the newcomers. What kind of development? I watched as James placed a stack of folders on the conference table. Each one had the Reed Technologies logo embossed on the cover, each one containing the evidence I'd collected over months of quiet investigation. The board has requested an emergency meeting, James announced, his gaze sweeping over Benjamin and Sophia before landing on me. They've received some concerning information. Benjamin's face remained impassive, but I caught the slight twitch in his jaw, the momentary flutter of panic in his eyes before he masked it with practiced indifference. Whatever it is can wait until after we've concluded my son's affairs. I'm afraid it can't, James replied, sliding one of the folders toward Benjamin. This concerns Thomas's affairs directly. Benjamin's fingers hovered over the folder, hesitant. Beside him, Sophia shifted uncomfortably, her earlier smugness completely evaporated. What is this? Benjamin demanded, but his voice lacked its usual authority. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. That, I said quietly, is everything Thomas found before he died. The weight of my words settled over the room like a physical presence. Sophia's face drained of color. What are you talking about? She whispered, but I could see in her eyes that she already knew. Thomas discovered what you've been doing, I continued, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. The corporate espionage, the stolen technology, the millions siphoned from his accounts. I turned to Benjamin. He knew about the loans you took out in his name too. Benjamin's hand trembled slightly as he finally opened the folder. His eyes scanned the contents, widening with each page he turned. This is absurd, he stammered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. These are private company matters, they have nothing to do with Thomas's will. Actually, James interjected, they have everything to do with it. Thomas made changes to his will shortly before his death. He produced another document from his briefcase. Changes that were contingent upon the discovery of certain irregularities in the company's finances. Sophia lunged for the document, but James pulled it back, just out of her reach. "What are you talking about?" she hissed. I watched as James unfolded the paper, his eyes meeting mine briefly before he began to read. "In the event that the financial discrepancies I have discovered within Reed Technologies are confirmed after my death, I, Thomas Reed, hereby stipulate that my entire estate, including my shares in Reed Technologies, shall pass to my wife, Sarah Reed." The silence that followed was absolute. Sophia's face contorted with disbelief and rage. Benjamin sat motionless, as if carved from stone. "You can't be serious," Sophia finally sputtered. This is fraud." "No," I replied calmly. "Fraud is what you've been committing for years. This is justice." "The board has reviewed the evidence," James added, gesturing to the silent figures standing behind him. "They've called for immediate suspensions pending a full investigation." Benjamin's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from him as the reality of his situation sank in. "You don't understand," he muttered. "The company was failing. I did what I had to do." "By stealing from your own son?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "And you," Sophia spat, turning on me with venom in her eyes. "You think you've won? You really think the board will let some schoolteacher take control of a multi-million-dollar tech company?" I smiled, feeling a strange calm wash over me. "I don't need to run the company, Sophia. I just need to make sure you and your father never do again." One of the board members stepped forward, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing eyes. "Ms. Reed has agreed to place the shares in a trust, managed by the board, while retaining oversight rights. The company will continue operations under new leadership, pending the outcome of our investigation." Sophia looked like she might scream or break something. Benjamin just looked broken. I stood up, smoothing down my dress. "The $5,000 check was a nice touch," I said, looking between father and daughter. "Very convincing. But Thomas knew you better than you thought. He knew exactly what you'd do once he was gone." "You won't get away with this," Sophia hissed. "I already have." I picked up my purse and turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Sophia? You were wrong about one thing. Thomas wasn't planning to leave me. He was planning to leave you, all of you. He just didn't get the chance." I walked out of the conference room without looking back, the sound of chaos erupting behind me, Sophia's shrill protests, Benjamin's desperate explanations, the board members' stern questions. None of it mattered anymore. Outside, the San Francisco sun was bright, the sky a perfect, cloudless blue. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past 8 months finally lifting from my shoulders. Thomas was gone, but his final act had been one of love, protecting me from the family that had never accepted me, ensuring I would have the power to bring them to justice. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "It's done. The board is taking it from here." I smiled and slipped the phone back into my purse. The game was over, and for once, I had won. Benjamin and Sophia would face the consequences of their actions, legal consequences that no amount of money or connections could make disappear. The Reed empire would continue, but under new stewardship, free from the corruption that had infected it for years. As for me, I wasn't sure what came next. But for the first time since Thomas died, I felt something like hope stirring in my chest. I had survived the Reed's cruel game. I had beaten them at it. And now, finally, I was free.